Herr Hitler.
That's exactly
Let us proceed. General Ludendorff, you have been accused of high treason. How do you plead?
Not guilty.
Adolf Hitler, you have been accused of high treason. How do you plead?
guilty.
Herr Hitler, are you a German citizen?
Talking about a piece of paper or the blood that runs through my veins?
Answer the question.
No.
In November of last year, you led a putsch against the Bavarian state and German Reich. You coerced and threatened Commissar Kahr, General Lossow, and Colonel Seisser. You have been accused of high treason and called an enemy of the state.
If a thief takes your money and you take it back, does that make you also a thief?
In 1918, we were betrayed by the November criminals, the ones who claimed to be our leaders. They entered the war, signed the Treaty of Versailles, and that was high treason.
This is supposed to be an interrogation, not a speech.
I was simply taking back that which was stolen from us 5 years before, namely the right to defend ourselves against the wishes of an incapable parliament. I used no force. I was supported by Commissar Kahr. Why isn't he on trial? If I am guilty of anything, then I am guilty of fighting to defend the rights of the German people.
Fascinating, isn't he?
General Ludendorff, the court finds you not guilty and releases you from custody. Herr Hitler, the court finds you guilty of treason.
Yes!
You are hereby sentenced to a fine of 200 gold marks and 5 years in Landsberg prison. You will be eligible for parole in 9 months.
All right. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The War Room, courtesy of YouTube. I am your host, Admiral Sigma Jones. My co-host, Mr. Logic's Finest, is here as well. First and foremost, we just want to give a shout out to our subscribers. Thanks for listening in. Thanks for tuning in. We truly appreciate the love and support. Hope you all are doing well this evening or this morning, depending on where you are at this time of the day. So, that little snippet that we just witnessed is a snippet of the trial for Hitler at the Landsberg prison. And so we just talked about Hitler's arrest and arraignment during the last podcast, and we got a little bit into his trial and how the trial was pretty much his what's the best term to use? The trial was mostly like a drama stage for Hitler, but we'll definitely get into more details of that. But without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce my co-host for this series, Mr. Logic's Finest. How's it going, good sir?
I'm good. How are you going?
Oh, not too bad, not too bad. I was kind of chuckling a bit watching that snippet because the judge, which is Judge Neithert, he definitely went very lenient on Hitler.
Yeah, I kind of noticed that. Yeah, he clearly was at the very least, if not a supporter, he clearly at the very least agreed with a large portion of what Adolf said as far as his mindsets, where his beliefs that it was supporting the rights of the German people, keeping Germany a self-determined nation state. Clearly, because the man committed treason. He attempted a coup against the government. And he basically was given, hey, listen, you're going to get out in about a year or so.
Yeah. Very much that, usually, at least we could say here in America, treason, the penalty for that is death if they find you guilty of treason. But in this case, the judge was clearly biased for Hitler. It was pretty much like, look, I gotta give you a sentence, but I'm not going to give you the maximum sentence. I'm just going to give you a sentence of 5 years. And on top of that, I will give you eligibility of parole after 9 months in confinement.
Yeah, I mean, when you hear that, guilty of treason, you're expecting at the bare minimum, you know what, you're getting thrown under the jail. Which to transition really quickly, because I can't we're going to talk about this when we go off air, but you now have one of the most autocratic and repressive states on earth allowing a political skit against your president, Dementia Joe. I mean, what more does it take for people's eyes to realize that this guy's clearly suffering from early onset dementia, and he has been since the campaign. But you know what? Switching gears. I mean, I just couldn't sit on that.
Oh, believe me, I've been noticing as well, and my thoughts are, I really had to ask myself this question during his last public attendance. I have never seen a world leader who was clearly handicapped, but the people around him are pretty much like, pay no attention to what you see here. Oh, look what's going on over across the pond. Oh, look, let's see what's going on in this country, that country. I mean, they are doing everything they can to minimize his exposure, or at least the weaknesses of his exposure.
The emperor has no clothes, but just totally ignore that. Pay that absolutely no mind. The question is this: if this was the leader of any other country, would all these excusers still make all these same excuses for dementia Joe Biden? If this was a Republican president, would all these excuses be made for dementia Joe Biden? And look, listen, I'm not left, I'm not right, I'm not Republican or Democrat. But at some point, you have to ask your question, like, doesn't your back hurt from bending over completely backwards to make excuses for this guy? I mean, at what point do the mental gymnastics stop?
I'm totally with you on that. I mean, to me, I don't care how much they try to have people be distracted, how much, and this is in regards to his inner circle,
Right.
far as how they try to distract people, how much they try to big him up to make it seem like, he's competent and everything. I'm sorry. When a leader's weakness is exposed to the world, you will never be able to erase that out of the minds of sane people, I would say. Even the most insane will still have it linked to their mind of this leader, he's definitely not in his best form, as they would say.
The thing is this, right? So going back to the campaign trail, when he would have a press conference, if he was asked a question or if he started talking and if he started going off script, he was like a 5-year-old playing little league. Like, at the mere sight of a butterfly, like, ooh, look, a butterfly, totally distracted. He would go totally off script. I mean, totally left field. Couldn't get his memories straight. Couldn't get his thoughts straight. Those aren't gaps. He's not misreading teleprompters. He's not making mistakes. I mean, the man clearly is suffering from early onset dementia. But, this really goes back to something much deeper. Vote blue no matter who. So as long as someone has a warm pulse, they could be comatose. As long as they're Democrat, people are going to vote for them, especially certain demographics. I mean, it's shocking. It is shocking how you can sit there for the very same people who literally attacked Donald Trump's mental capacity, who attacked Baby Bush's mental capacity. You may be too young to remember. For those who attacked Senior Bush's mental capacity, they certainly attacked President Reagan's mental capacity. How do you now turn around? When in my lifetime memory, I have not seen a president this mentally deficient and capable since President Reagan, his second term. And you excuse everything. In fact, your only comeback is to deflect, and excuses. That is the height of not only hypocrisy, it is insanity. But you know what? Listen, I'm going to get off my soapbox.
Well, sir, I'll put it like this to kind of transition to our topic tonight.
Mhm.
This is what we're noticing with the president and all. And like you pointed out, with all the former presidents, the ones that are not blue, how people are quick to point out their weaknesses and everything. But when it comes to their president, oh, this the most competent man they ever seen. That is a clear example of propaganda.
Which brings me back to what I've said. People have very short memories, and it's a cycle. When there's a Democratic president, Democrats complain that when there's a Democratic president, people complain that he can't work with the Congress because Republicans are in control. When there's a Republican president, Republicans complain they can't work with the Democrats because there's a Republican president in control. Like, do you not see the cycles and the hypocrisy? As I've told you before, every 18 to 24 months, the entire country develops an acute case of amnesia.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Which I'm definitely very curious as far as this year being the midterms.
Mhm.
I'm very curious to see what's going to be the game plan for both sides, especially after things that have happened within at least this year and last year. I'm definitely going to be sitting back to see how much this circus is going to continue. But again, like you said, people just have such short-term memories that they don't even realize that they're literally on a hamster wheel just going completely in circles.
So here's the thing, right? So actually, done um, going back to President Lincoln, and I stopped at him because slavery. So going back to President Lincoln, every U.S. president has had control of both houses of the Congress for at least 2 years out of his presidency, at a minimum. So what's going to happen come the midterm elections? Literally the same exact thing that happens every midterm elections. The Congress and the entire country is going to flip to the opposite party.
Yep.
And that's the cycle that no one notices. Because again, going back to Lincoln, every other president has been the opposite party. It flips. Republican, Democrat, Republican, Democrat. The only time that does not happen is if the following president was the former president's vice president.
Mm-hmm.
That
Right.
pattern has held true. You can set your watch to it. That's why I know, unless Vice President Harris wins re-election, your next president will again be another Republican. The same way that I know I can set my watch to it come the midterm elections, everything will flip over to the Republican Party. Because it's a cycle that literally has not changed, at the very least, since President Lincoln. So why would I think that anything is going to change now? It's not. But again,
Nope.
I do the research and I observe and I separate things.
Very true, sir. Very true. Well, let us jump right into
Yeah.
the
Sorry,
readings
we
here.
can stay here for hours on this
Oh
topic.
yeah. Oh yeah. But I like the fact that the readings help to tie into what goes on today. 100 years later.
Right, exactly. Which is why we keep saying, I know on the outset, I get it. It's World War II. It's a very dry topic. Especially our approach is different.
Mhm.
It's not a common approach, but we tie in and show people, we show you how the life lessons are timeless and they repeat each other. That's the thing that amuses me. People literally don't learn from history.
Oh no. No. If anything, people today just act so surprised, like I've never seen this happen before. To me, when I hear somebody say that, it's like, yeah, you're definitely not a student of history. You, you should wear one of those hats that say, I don't study history. But all right, let's continue before we
Right.
go deeper down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
All right. So, for those who've been following, we are continuing our reading in the Adolf Hitler, the definitive biography. The link to that book is posted in the chat. We are now in section 2 of chapter 7. We will hopefully be able to get into section 3, wrap that up before we get into chapter 8, which we'll get into Mein Kampf, and we'll actually start to see a few beginnings of it in tonight's session going into section 3. So, without further ado, let's get started.
Execute.
Alright, so where we last left off, it says, Hitler won the Battle of Words, and when the court retired to consider the verdict, a number of observers were convinced he would be found not guilty. Judge Neithert was bent on acquitting Ludendorff, regardless of the testimony, and the 3 lay judges, including one who had peered grimly at Hitler throughout the trial, were also unanimously for freeing the chief defendant. On the evidence of my defense, Hitler commented long after trial, they were convinced that Carr, Lassalle, and Caesar must have been equally guilty. They were informed of the objection that an acquittal might entail the risk of having the affair referred to the court at Leipzig. This made the jury reflect. They decided it was more prudent to have me found guilty, the more so as they had been promised a remission of the sentence after 6 months. When Assistant Prosecutor Ehard arrived on April the 1st for the sentence announcement, he found the room crowded with women bearing flowers for their idol. He ordered the flowers removed. Other female adherents asked permission to take a bath in Hitler's tub. He denied the request. Just after 10 a.m., the defendants posed for a picture in front of the building. Ludendorff, in full military dress complete with a pointed helmet, scowled. To his left stood Hitler, in unbelted trench coat, so neatly cleaned and pressed it looked new, clutching a Veller's hat in right hand. His mustache was neatly clipped, his hair slicked back, and he looked as calm, assured, and well-fed as a successful businessman. For the first time in his life, he was also on the punchy side, 170 pounds. By the time the accused were escorted to the courtroom, a large crowd clustered outside the building. It took almost an hour to read out the sentence, and there was no outburst when Hitler, along with Poner, Kreibel, and Weber, were sentenced to 5 years in Landsberg prison. 6 months were deducted because of the pretrial detention. As predicted, Ludendorff was set free. Once more, he answered the considerations shown his rank by petulance. I look upon this acquittal as a disgrace which my dress of honor and my decorations have not earned, said the man who had denied responsibility for the putsch. His heated protest annoyed and embarrassed presiding Judge Neithert, who was most responsible for the acquittal. Even in guilt, Hitler was honored by the court. It refused to deport him to Austria as an undesirable alien. Hitler is German-Austrian. In the opinion of the court, a man who thinks and feels as German as Hitler, a man who voluntarily served 4.5 years in the German army during the war, who earned high war decorations for bravery in the face of the enemy, who was wounded and whose health was impaired, should not be subjected to the Republic Protection Law. The court saved its scorn for Hitler's 3 enemies, declaring that the tragedy could have been prevented if Carr, Lassalle, and Caesar had clearly said no to Hitler's demands for participation in the putsch, or if the repeated attempts by the accused on the night of November 8th to clarify the situation had met with a measure of cooperation. Hitler's sentence was the first announced. While the others were being read out, he was hurried outside to a waiting car to prevent any demonstration. By late afternoon, Hitler was back in cell number 7. It had been refurnished in his absence and looked much more inviting. But his earlier confidence was gone, and jailer Franz Hemrich noticed that he looked more wretched than ever. This depression soon passed. Before long, he opened his leather briefcase and brought out an empty diary. On the frontispiece, in the upper right-hand corner, he wrote, "Motto: when a world comes to an end, then entire parts of the earth can be convulsed, but not the belief in a just cause." Below this, he inscribed these words: "The trial of common narrow-mindedness and personal spite is over, and today starts my struggle. Mein Kampf, Landsberg, on the 1st of April, 1924. So, pretty much this shows exactly what we seen in the snippet from earlier. Pretty much, Ludendorff was set free. Hitler, despite pleading guilty and being found guilty, essentially is a free man given luxury and all. His other enemies were given harsher punishments. And now that he's in a more comfortable setting in his prison, which we're definitely going to get to later on in tonight's show, now Hitler has time to reflect on his thoughts. And we are now seeing the beginning of his writing of Mein Kampf.
Which led me to that question that I asked on our last stream. Did this failure radicalize him? Because up until it wasn't until after this failure that he became radical, that he became so hell-bent desired that he was going to rule all of continental Europe and expand Germany's power.
Right.
Because his focus was Germany. His focus was only Germany. He wanted a strong, self-sufficient Germany, not dependent on anyone, not controlled by anyone. That's all that he wanted. But after this failure, everything changed. Everything changed. So it's funny. The funny thing is, in failure, it's like the monster finally took shape. To me, it's a fascinating thought.
I agree. And they say something, and this been told to me when I was little, but I'm pretty sure you could relate to it as well.
Mm-hmm.
They say you don't get much growth in success, but you get a lot of growth through failure.
Very true. Very true. How we handle failure, because that's when we grow the most, because it leads to introspection, it leads to reflection and self-analysis. For some of us, anyway. For some of us.
That is true. That is true. Because failure, when pushed in a more productive avenue, is definitely something any successful person will tell you. Failure is what made them better. Failure is what made them able to become more of what they are today.
Exactly.
But in the case of Hitler, this is where failure may not have been the right choice for him. I mean, you have a person who already comes from a bad background. He has countless failures leading up to this point. So when all of this failure is stacking up, yes, he's learning from it, but he's learning from it for the wrong, unproductive side.
Yeah. Very true. Very true. It's like he. So the thing is, right? Hitler learned from it, and he definitely learned lessons, and he changed things, and he did things in a different way. But he was more. He became more positively productive in rebuilding the nation and putting the nation back to work and
Hmm.
focusing on the infrastructure and the economy. Again, when there's a chicken in every pot, there are no revolutions.
Nope.
But his goal the entire time, the impetus, were completely the wrong reasons. He wanted to dominate continental Europe and as much of the world as he possibly could. And also, there were lessons that he did not learn, things that directly contributed to his failure. Um, Over delegation or not enough delegation, not understanding the military chain of command, not having the proper advisors and counselors around him and listening to them, and not understanding his weaknesses and bringing people and having people around him whose strengths he could rely on to help the overall goal. And those were failings that followed him all throughout the next 15 years, all the way through to the end of the war.
Right. Exactly. And it kind of ties in to another old saying: life is based 1% of life is based on circumstances that's outside of your control. The other 99% is how you respond to it. And I look so far here with Hitler. Even after this failed attempt of a coup d'etat, this would have been still ample opportunity for him, even if he still wanted to go the political route. This would have been ample opportunity for him to learn the ways of politics, which later on he will, and maybe seek out more productive people in his life
Right.
that would kind of help to nurture that political side of him wanted to be more involved. But as you rightly pointed out, sir, he got involved with the wrong type of people who they themselves had hidden agendas that only kind of help Hitler feel like he pretty much he could do no wrong.
Yeah, sycophants. He surrounded himself with sycophants.
Hmm.
And the problem there is you can't trust someone whose main goal is to stroke your ego and tell you things that you want to hear. As the
Mm-hmm.
old saying goes, beware of flattery and beware the flatterers. Because the very thing that you're using to control people can be used to control you.
Yes, sir.
As you, my friend, pointed out on our last stream.
Yes, sir. And we're definitely going to get to more of those characters coming up too. All right, so we now get into the last section of chapter 7, and this is a pretty lengthy section, section 3. Hopefully, we should be able to cover most of it, but if not for sure, we'll cover the rest in the next episode. So, it starts off by saying Hitler had two comrades on the upper floor of the Festung. Colonel Kreibel was in cell 8, and the leader of the Bonn Oberland, Dr. Weber, the veterinary, was in number 9. Excuse me. Although Hitler complained daily about the barred windows, life at the fortress was passable. At 6 a.m., the two night warders went off duty, and the cell doors would be open. Invariably, Hitler was dressed, washed, and waiting. He took a good deal of care of his teeth and mouth. That came of his having been gassed in the war. An hour later, convict trustees served the political prisoners a breakfast of coffee and bread or porridge in their common room. At 8, the doors to the court and garden were open, and the men were allowed to wrestle, box, or exercise on the parallel bars and vaulting horse. Because of his injured arm, Hitler had to content himself with the job of referee. After half an hour, the prisoners strolled in the long, narrow garden, bordered on one side by the prison building and the other side by a 20-foot wall. A gravel path was Hitler's favorite promenade, and here he would stroll back and forth, usually with Emil Morris, his chauffeur, voicing the political theorems he had jotted down in his diary. Sometimes, recalled Hemrick, those who had formerly belonged to the storm troops would start singing party songs as they stepped along. At first, we took no notice, or at least we raised no objection to this. But when the convicts on their side took to yelling in unison and disturbed the peace of the whole neighborhood, we put it to a stop. At about 10 a.m., the men were brought in from their exercise and mail was distributed. Numerous food packages arrived from nationalist organizations and private admirers. Hitler particularly looked forward to poppy seed strudel, an Austrian specialty, which a group of National Socialist women brought every Friday. But, recalled Dr. Weber, the chief gave the bacon, sausage, and ham to his companions, preferably those on the ground floor. Upstairs with him were the elite. Yes, even behind the wall, there existed a class system. They were not equal before the law, nor were they equal as prisoners. Now, I just want to pause here real quick, because I wanted to point some things out. Now, reading the description, the prisons in Europe, and especially prisons like in Germany and all, paints a very different picture in regards to how other nations handle their prisoners compared to, say, America. And yet it's still, but yet it's still, that last part in that sentence is what gets me. Because he says, upstairs with him were the elite. Yes, even behind the wall, there existed a class system. They were not equal before the law, nor were they equal as prisoners.
Yeah, because you know what? Human nature reflects itself in every area of human endeavor. Even behind bars, there's a class system. There's a power structure. There are men who rule, and there are men who are ruled over. Excuse me. That never changes. And by the way, European prisons, they're gulags. You know, for as much as the bleeding heart liberals love to go on and on about prison reform, you know what? Maybe they need to spend 24 to 48 hours in a European prison to realize just how good American prisons have it. Or,
Right.
ironically, Russian prisons, because they're gulags. They're straight out of movies. They're beyond inhumane. But I digress.
Indeed. Indeed. And again, it just shows that even in a society like a prison, there is no such thing as equity or equality.
Mm.
And the reason I say that, and this kind of ties in with today's political arena. We have people that are so bent on trying to make everything and anything equity and equality. Now, on paper, that sounds beautiful. I don't think you will get anybody, at least anybody with a sound mind and some sanity, that would disagree with that.
Mm.
But in practice, like you just pointed out, good sir, it's in human nature. In practice, it just doesn't work that way.
It really doesn't, because ideally, excuse me, it, ideally, what you really want is equality of opportunity. You're never going to get equality of outcome. Equity is equity is a dream. It is unrealistic because we are not all the same. We are not
Hmm.
all equal. Some of us are smarter than others. Some of us look better than others. Some of us are faster and stronger than others. Some of us are better and more capable at things than others. That's who we
Right.
are as people. We all tell each other the fairy tales that we're all the same and that we're all equal and we can all achieve the same things. That sounds good to 5 and 6 year olds, but grown adults know better. So
Mhm.
it is impossible. You will never have equality of outcome. And ironically enough, the more that the woke mob bleeding heart liberals attempt to shove equality down our throats and equity down our throats, the more they ironically prevent the very same thing that they claim they want, which is equality of outcome. And that is never going to happen. At best, you can hope for equality of opportunity. Give everyone the same access and opportunity to show what they can do, to
Mhm.
try to attain what can be attained. And you know what you're going to find out? You're going to have winners. You're going to have losers. You're going to have those who are at the best. You're going to have those who are at the middle. And you're going to have those who are at the bottom. And those who are at the bottom always complain. And I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but it is what it is. That's
Right.
that is the human condition. Equality of outcome is impossible. It could never happen. At best, what you would seek to strive for, as you said, any sane, rational person would want equality of opportunity. But you're never
Hmm.
going to have equality of outcome. So equity, it's it's a joke. It sounds good. It's unrealistic.
Sir, I couldn't agree more. And to me, that's where I wanted to point out that, whether you're in a free society or even in a prison society, there is no such thing as equity or equality. Like you said, the true essence of equality in the modern world is meritocracy, the
Yes,
opportunity to prove what can you do in the open market. If
exactly.
you have a gift and talent, you will be rewarded for it. Now, just in mind that there's some people that just have better talents and better strengths. And that's a good thing. It's supposed to be designed that way. And the beauty about it is this world being so big and so massive, okay, if one area is not your forte or you're not getting good results, you may need to relocate. Go to another area that suits your needs so that you can grow your potential. But trying to force a system or even trying to force a whole country to just give everybody equality no matter what they do or what they say, I'm sorry. No sane country wants to be put in that predicament.
Funny enough, right? Sports is the perfect example. There are
Mm,
winners, there are losers. There are some people, they are naturally gifted. They have all the ability in the world,
right.
but they're lazy. They don't work hard. They don't apply themselves because they rely on their talent. Talent alone is not enough. You have to work hard. You have to be dedicated. That's why you will see people who have every bit of the talent and the ability as a Hall of Famer, but they never achieve that status because they never work hard, because they always sit back and rely on their talent. Now, what you have there is you have equality of opportunity.
Hmm.
Everyone starts out at zero. Everyone has the equal chance and opportunity to show what they can do. But yet, the outcomes are far from equal. And that is a microcosm and a reflection of the human condition. Everyone is not the same. The best you can hope for is equality in opportunity. You will never have equality of outcome. So that idea of equity, again, it does not exist. It sounds good. It's emotional, but it's utterly absurd.
Exactly. And shout out to JJ Wilson. Good to see you, sir. So next it says, just before noon, the political prisoners were served dinner, usually one pot meal, in the common room. The others waited behind their chairs until Hitler strode in. Then someone called out, "Attention!" He stood at the head of the table until every man in turn came forward with his table greeting. Politics was rarely discussed. Hitler usually chatted about theater, art, or automobiles. After the meal, they would smoke and gossip for a quarter of an hour while the table was being cleared. And then the chief would retreat to his cell on the top floor to read, write in his diary, or try to catch up on his correspondence. This period was interrupted at about 4 o'clock for tea or coffee, which was brewed in the common room. At 4:45, the gates to the garden were unlocked again, and Hitler would walk alone, or with Maurice, for more than an hour. At 6, each man had supper in his own cell, a herring or sausage and salad. Those who wanted could buy half a liter of beer or wine. After another hour of sport or exercise, the men assembled in the common room before returning to their cells. At 10, lights are out. Occasionally, Hitler varied his schedule, retreating to his cell as soon as breakfast was over to study or receive visitors. According to Henrik, he soon became his enthusiastic admirer. According to Henrik, who soon became his enthusiastic admirer, he exercised a great influence over his comrades. Because of his sense of soldierly discipline, there were none of the usual outbursts of temper or men picked up together. He was always at their command to be of help or service. Usually he was singularly cheerful, but bad news made him a trifle thoughtful and anxious. He was particularly disturbed by the rancor of party feuds. It was becoming increasingly obvious that the NSDAP was being split in two, and that the schism was due in large part to his own vague instructions to his proxy. Rosenberg had joined the Strasser and others to support the Völkisch Bloc in the Bavarian state elections. More significant, these two, with the help of Ludendorff, had not only formed the National Socialist Freedom Movement, but entered a slate of 34 candidates in the national elections. The Bavarian election came first, in April, and the ill-assorted Völkisch Bloc scored an unexpected triumph, winning 191,862 votes, and finished second to the Bavarian People's Party. The Goerings were delighted with the triumph. Also, Karen wrote her father from Austria, "It means pardon for all of us living in foreign countries. I really can't believe it. I'm so happy. It has been a very bad time. In North Germany, we are counting on even more votes for Hitler and his movement. And then, Hitler can at last come into power. You see, dear father, I believe so much in him. He is a wonderful man, a genius, such a one, I am convinced, as God seldom gives to the world." The national election a month later proved to be as successful as predicted, with the newly formed National Socialist Freedom Movement polling almost 2 million votes. 32 of the 34 candidates, including Strasser, Röhm, Feder, Frick, and Ludendorff, were elected. It was ironic that Hitler, who had opposed the basic idea, was responsible in large part to their victory. His oratory at the trial had introduced National Socialism to many voters who were impressed by its leader's forceful manner and his effectively enunciated ideas. But other more profound and lasting forces also contributed to the triumph. The tandem appeal of patriotism and racism was growing throughout the nation. Moreover, even though inflation had been ended by the drastic national currency reform, those in the middle class who had lost homes and property were expressing displeasure at the polls, along with those in the working class who were still unemployed. Okay. Funny how history is repeating itself. So I look at the previous president, play the scenario, where the economy was going good and whatnot, things were going all right. But then you had a foreign force, in this case, the pandemic, comes in, wreaks havoc, people get mad, and now the former president, unable to get elected for his next term, is ousted. So, new president comes in, the current one, and you would think that under his presidency, he should be able to make things at least sustainable for everybody. But as the evidence shows, things are just not going so well for his party, and especially his administration. And now there are people who are being priced out of the market. People are losing homes. Inflation is going crazy. And what do I see happening? Whole bunch of talks of patriotism, nationalism, and even racism.
Yeah, history repeats itself. I said it before and I'll say it again. America is walking the same exact path as the Weimar Republic. It's
Yep.
not quite near the end yet when Hitler won the election in 1932, but it's clear. All the signs are there, and it is textbook. So now you're seeing now you're seeing that Disney, the Walt Disney Company, Walt Disney is turning in his grave. The
Oh, yeah.
executives at Disney are not even hiding their gay agenda. And just to even say it like that sounds however the way it sounds, but it's their own words. They're not even hiding it. They had Zoom call meetings that someone leaked to the press. That they're not even hiding it. Gay agenda. Why are you pushing an LGBT agenda on children through Disney products at the parks, through merchandising? And I specifically call out Disney to say this. You're seeing the collapse internally of society. The same exact thing that happened to the Weimar Republic.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm just waiting to see what will be the catalyst of the stock market crashing. What would be a similar event that will suddenly turn this whole leftist leaning stuff right on top of his head?
You know what? All I'll say is this. I don't want to see that. You know,
I don't. I don't either.
I don't know. I don't want to see it. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to know about it. I don't know. But I do know this. Time will tell. Either way, so we'll see. Hopefully, we won't see.
Yeah, hopefully. All right. Next, it says, all right. Understandably, Hitler was not overjoyed by the elections. Ludendorff was claiming credit for the victory, and being free, was in a position to capitalize on his claim. Hitler was forced to join in the applause while fearing that the new group might swallow up his outlawed party. Nor was his apprehension groundless. The threat to his political power was illustrated by circulation of a pamphlet to Volkish groups, which admitted that the National Socialists were pioneers and forerunners of the Volkish movement, then sarcastically declared that they are not its savior. The whole affair was a painful but valuable lesson to Hitler. Never again, he vowed, would he take a stand unless he was sure he had the power to enforce it. Hitler was being attacked from his own stronghold. At the offices of the Völkischer Beobachter, which had been closed down after the putsch, Drexler and Vetter were conducting a campaign against him. They called Hitler a dictator and a prima donna, and proclaimed that he must be brought under greater control if the party was ever to be built up again, recalled Hanstigl. One day, Drexler cornered Hans Frank in a small Munich park and poured out a stream of complaints against their imprisoned leader. He intrigued against me and broke all of his promises, pushed me out, and now has wrecked the party for all time with his crazy putsch. Once Hitler was free, the rowdy brown shirts would take to the streets again. There are terrible times ahead for Germany. Hitler betrayed me, and that is why I oppose him wherever I can. That made Kurt Ludek return from his money-raising trip abroad to find confusion in the ranks of the underground NSDAP. The various groups quarreled internally and with each other, nor were there antagonisms, private scandals. Enemies clawed each other in public, regardless both of the spectacle they were giving, the shocked onlookers, and of the damage they were doing to themselves. From Hafstigl, Amann, and Esser, he learned that Rosenberg was the cause of party deterioration. But Rosenberg had told him a different story. They attacked me, he said, because I represent Hitler, whom they dare not attack, helpless though he is. If they eliminate me, they move one step nearer the top. Ludek decided to travel to Landsberg to find out from Hitler how the danger could best be dispelled. According to Ludek's account, Hitler declared that the party must pursue a new line of action. Its future lay not in armed coups, but the ballet box. I am convinced this is our best line of action, now that conditions in the country have changed so radically. Hitler appeared to be not at all downcast by the party squabbles. Indeed, he was so confident of final victory that my own misgivings were dispelled, for his mood was contagious. But the party split continued to widen. A few weeks later, Strasser joined with Ludendorff in proposing the foundation of the National Socialist Freedom Party, thus creating a single Volkish party of which the NSDAP would be but a part. This raised the intensity of inter-party rancor, which, in turn, forced Hitler into making a radical decision. On the 7th of July, Der Völkische Führer announced that he had laid down the leadership of the National Socialist movement, and that he will refrain from all political activity during his term of detention. He requested his adherents not to visit him in prison, since he had so much work and was also engaged in writing a book. Now, before I continue, I wanted to touch on something in the last paragraph, where Hitler told Ludek that the party must pursue a new line of action. Its future lay not in armed coups, but in the ballet box.
In the ballot box. In the ballot box. You know, there's something that, to quote Malcolm X, it's either the ballot or the bullet. And people, I think, unfortunately focused on the bullet part, but they missed the ballot part because Malcolm X had said something that I think got missed by a lot of people. He said there are only two ways to change a system. If you're unhappy with a system and you feel that it's heavy, I hate to use that word, oppressive, so on and so forth, there's only two ways. You have to completely overthrow it and remove it and install your own system. Lacking the power to do so, you have to join the system, go within the system, and change it from the inside out. So, if you don't have the power for armed coup, then you have to join the system through the ballot box, infiltrate the system at any and all levels, and then change it from the inside out. And a lot of people miss that statement because what what Malcolm X was really saying is you can talk revolution and change and resistance and counterculture, but ultimately, listen, big guy, unless you have the ability right now for armed insurrection and coup, forget that talk. You have to do it through the system from the inside out. And your biggest weapon is at the ballot box. Because if you vote them all out and you vote all of yours in, game over. Game one.
Now, good sir, you bring up a good point.
Mhm.
And see, this would kind of bring this situation for me. Now, I'm not going to try to go too deep in the rabbit hole, but I'm going to try to dig a little bit in that hole before going too deep. Now, you have a demographic of people that I guess you could say for the past, I don't know, 70 years, 80 years, maybe more so, depending on who you talk to, they have only voted for one political party for so long. And they honestly believe that this particular party, as long as they continue to vote for this party, that the people of this party will always look after them. Because, hey, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to change things at the ballot box. But here's what they don't understand. If you've been voting for this particular party for 70 plus years, and yet they have done nothing for you for all those 70 plus years, then how are you actually changing things at the ballot box?
Bingo. And that is my question that I keep asking that I can never get an answer to. So, if the Republican Party has proven that they don't need you to elect candidates, from president all the way down to local goal catcher, Republican Party needs you literally for absolutely nothing. The entire planet knows that you will blindly give your unwavering support to the Democratic Party, yet all they give you are empty promises and hot air. Where is your political power exactly? And when I ask this question, I get nothing but crickets.
And I'm glad you say that, because that's where I want people to understand that when Hitler says this, that the future lays not in coups, but in the ballot box. He's saying that when you understand what power you have, use it. And unfortunately, when I see this, I think of that same demographic group that voted for a party for 70 plus years and has gotten nothing in return. that tells me you are a group of people that either you don't know how politics work, or I really have to question, were you genetically designed to not understand logic?
Well, we're definitely not going to go there, but as you know how I feel about that, how I feel about that question. But the thing here is this, right? So, um, you learn at an early age not to put your hand on the stove.
Hmm.
Mommy told you, don't touch the stove when it's on. Don't touch the stove when it's on. Don't touch the stove when it's on. You were probably curious as a child, and you put your hand up on the stove. Ow! And you never
Right.
did it again. But
Mm-mm.
here's the thing: when you keep putting your hand on that stove and you keep getting burns, like at what point does the lesson sink in? You cannot reason with a tiger when your head is in its mouth.
Right.
If you keep doing the same thing repeatedly, yet expecting a different result, you are insane. At
Hmm.
what point do you not learn the lessons? Okay, if we keep going in this direction and all we get is abject failure, let's go in a different direction, whatever that direction may be. Even if you don't, even if you feel you ideologically are against the other direction, but you haven't gone that way. You know nothing about it. All you have are your preconceptions and your ideas. But here's what you do know: the direction that you're on, that you stayed with for the past 70 plus years, is giving you nothing but abject failure. Or you take one step forward and two steps back. I'm sorry, you take two steps forward and one step back. You take three steps forward and two steps back. So maybe, just maybe, it's time to go in a different direction to try something different. But, again, that requires rational thought. And since rational thinking is unwelcome in most social situations, you see the continued results that you get.
Exactly. So, but before we move on to the next paragraph, I just want to make sure the audience understand that yes, you can gain power through the ballot box, but you need to know how to utilize the ballot box. Otherwise, it's it's literally wasting time in regards of you keep voting for a political system over and over and over, and like Logic Finder says, you expecting different results each and every time. That's just insanity. And Hitler knew right then while he was in prison, that's not how you go about gaining political power. All right. So next, the paragraph says, in some circles, it was deduced that Hitler was pretending to write as an excuse to avoid the internecine political battle. But even before his arrest, he had been seriously thinking of composing a history of the Jews. Now he had a better idea, which obsessed him to such a degree that he welcomed a vacation from politics so he could get it down on paper. In addition to jotting down ideas in his diary, he dictated to Maurice. Then, in the privacy of his cell, he would laboriously type out the manuscript with two fingers on the typewriter loaned to him by the warden. Guard Hemrick recalled, as he finished one section of the book after another, he would read it aloud to the others in their evening assemblies. The book was not always written under favorable conditions. The window, for instance, leaked during a heavy rain. One day, while mopping the floor, Hitler burst into laughter. There was a prison cat, perched on top of a stool in the middle of the mess, and puddle and licking at it after her own finicky fashion. His most helpful assistant was a newcomer to the top floor. After Hitler's sentence, Rudolf Hess had taken Professor Haushofer's advice to surrender. Hess helped Hitler formulate ideas, took dictation, and relieved him of typing chores. Frau Wagner also helped by providing quantities of bond paper, carbon paper, pencils, ink, and erasers. At first, the book was to have been a general history, but the first volume, under the ponderous working title 4.5 Years of Struggle Against Lies, Stupidity, and Cowardice, now included an autobiographical account of Hitler's childhood, his years in Vienna, the war, the Red Revolution, and the beginnings of the party in Munich. It turned out to be the story of a poor boy's political education and gave him the opportunity to discourse not only on his three favorite subjects, Jews, Marxism, and racism, but the futility of parliamentary government, syphilis, the decline of theater, the monarchy, and responsibility for loss of the war. Writing down his political theories was in itself a process of self-education. During my imprisonment, I had time to provide my philosophy with a natural, historical foundation. The authorities had made a mistake by imprisoning me. They would have been far wiser to let me make speeches all the time, without giving me respite. It was remarkable how Hitler had gained ascendancy over his jailers. He had already converted a majority of the staff to National Socialism, and even the warden became so impressed that he permitted Hitler's lights to stay on until midnight. Surveillance was so lax that the prisoners established their own underground newspaper, which was typed and then heterographed. One section was comic, the other serious. Hitler usually wrote the leading article and would often contribute caricatures. The existence of the paper was not discovered until one man thoughtlessly wrote home about it. But by the time Hemrick raided the editorial office in Cell 1, nothing could be found. It was also Hemrick's duty to spy on the evening get-togethers in the common room to make sure no revolution was being plotted. But the eavesdropper became propagandized by Hitler's words, and soon fell almost completely under his spell. He and his assistants would gather outside the door, all ears, alert for what he was saying about things that concerned our own interests. We were immensely struck by his speaking. Hitler would close these meetings with a Sieg Heil, and the group would burst out into a revised version of the song composed by Gregor Strasser's group on the day of the putsch. Even if they betrayed us, or herded us like mistreated animals, we knew what we were doing, and remained true to the fatherland. Hitler's spirit in our hearts cannot sink, cannot stink. Stormtrooper Hitler will someday rise again. Now, before we continue, I'd like to point out that the one paragraph where Hitler talked about his self-education, and he said, quote, "During my imprisonment, I had time to provide my philosophy with a natural historical foundations. The authorities had made a mistake by imprisoning him. They would have been far wiser to let me make speeches all the time, without giving me respite." Now, I think this goes back to your foundational question from the last stream and even this stream. Had the putsch went in Hitler's favor, would Hitler be way different than he was at this point in time? And more, that evidence is clearly showing in your favor that, yeah, had the pooch been in Hitler's favor, I think he may have still been in politics, but nowhere would he been as cunning and as devious, and especially in getting to know his better background. I don't think all of that would have factored had things went about differently.
Yeah, that's my thinking. That had he actually been successful, had the beer hall putsch succeeded, had the Nazi Party taken control then, that we would not have seen the monster that we saw 10 years later, because he became radicalized. So in failure, he actually, we saw the galvanization, the radicalization, because it taught him some important lessons. He didn't learn from the lessons that he should have, but he learned how to take power bloodlessly. But he did not learn the effective techniques to stay in power, to maintain power, because again, he did not learn some of the lessons that got him there, he learned. And in his failure, the things that directly contributed to his failure, it's like he learned from half of them, but he didn't learn from the other half. And it's interesting that the other half that he did not learn would actually have served him better during the war.
Right. Interesting. Just interesting times. Next, it says, as Hitler became more involved in his book, he left his men to their own devices. Out of boredom one evening, a dozen of them subjected him to an old-fashioned peasant hazing. They smeared their faces with oven rust and black wrapped themselves in sheets and marched to cell 7 armed with pokers and brooms. Brandishing their weapons, they demanded that he subject himself to their tribunal. What followed was a parody of the Munich trial, Bavarian comedy style. Hitler, so wrote Henrik, joined in the fun and solemnly accepted his sentence, an auto tour of Germany. Then, laughing still but shaking his head, went back to work. Hapstickle, one of the less reverent visitors, noticed that Hitler was gaining weight and advised him to take part in prison sports and cut down on sweets. Hitler had an answer for each admonition. A leader cannot afford to be beaten at games, and I shall always be able to get the extra pounds off just by speaking. Hapstickle brought him several art books, but it was a recent copy of the satirical weekly Simplicissimus that did most to cheer him up. On the front page was a cartoon showing Hitler in armor entering Berlin on a white horse as if he were Sir Galahad. There you are, he said. They can laugh, but I shall get there yet. He received many ladies, including a monthly visit from 83-year-old Frau Carola Hoffman, no relation to the photographer, who he called my beloved and devoted Mutterchen. Still pretty and petite, she was a retired school teacher who had taken it upon herself the past few years to do his laundry and see that he was properly dressed. She fed him on cakes and cream, and, like a good mother, made him pay for the sweets with lectures on how to behave in polite society. Once Karen Goering came for financial assistance, but had to be satisfied with a picture of the Fuhrer inscribed, to the honored wife of my SA commander. Jus Prahl, the fiancé of Hess, was a regular visitor. Every Saturday she bicycled to Landsberg from Munich, and one time managed to smuggle in a camera. Hitler and Hess would be waiting for her on top of the Festung staircase, and the former invariably kissed her hand in his gallant Viennese manner before leading her to the common room for lunch. Once she came by train with her mother, who was not too fond of Hess, particularly now that he was a prisoner. But a kiss from Hitler changed all of that. My mother was totally unpolitical, but as soon as she got back to Munich, she joined the party. All because of that hand kiss. Professor Haushofer, who visited Hess to bring him books and articles on political science and geopolitics, including works by Sir Halford Mackinder, he sometimes saw Hitler, but never alone. I avoided it, he later testified. I always had the feeling that he felt the distrust of a semi-educated person towards a scientifically educated person. Perhaps it sprang from Haushofer's expressed hope that Hess would continue his academic career and not enter political life, or the fact that the professor openly described the putsch as a tragic mistake. He was aware that Hitler was writing his political autobiography and that he had discussed Lebensraum and geopolitics with Hess. But I received the impression, and I am utterly convinced, that Hitler never understood these things and did not have the right outlook for understanding them. Realizing that neither Hess nor Hitler understood political geography, Haushofer tried to explain the basis, for example, of the second edition of Ratzel's work. But it was useless. Hitler took from geopolitics only what he wanted. While Hess still revered the professor, he had already decided to become Hitler's personal secretary and devote his life to National Socialism. By now, he was the chief's closest confidant, and from this position of trust, he confirmed not only Hitler's genuine disgust with the wrangles disrupting the party, but his preoccupation with the book. On July 16, Hess wrote a university friend that her Hitler wanted to know nothing of present-day politics. From the time being, he has withdrawn himself publicly from the leadership of the party. The reason is that he does not want to assume the responsibility for what happens outside without his knowledge, and possibly against his better judgment. Nor is he able to smooth out the constant quarrels, at least not from here. He considers it unnecessary to bother with such petty disagreements. On the other hand, he is convinced that once he obtains his freedom, he could steer everything back on the right track. Determined opposition to the Völkisch merger came from left-wing Nazis in North Germany, who denounced the racists as enemies of the working class. Collaboration with them, warned one student leader, would force the true National Socialists, especially the workers, to leave the NSDAP. While these northern leftists agreed with Esser on the impossibility of merger, they wanted no part of him, and 2 days after the Weimar meeting, one of them wrote a letter obviously intended for the Führer's eyes. It expressed a desire for Hitler to come to the north once he left prison, but to leave Hermann Esser behind. Such men would not be tolerated in the north. We will not build a Chinese wall around Hitler, as was done in Munich in 1923. Here live men of northern blood who refute spiritual servitude, who are not cowardly. We are not speakers and mercenaries, but only men who ask for contact with the Führer, men who want to serve the cause. Now, interesting that last paragraph talks about left-wing Nazis. And I'm glad that topic came up because when people think of Nazis, they think of extreme rightism or the extreme right. But they don't realize that there were actually some left-wing people or left-wing groups who did consider themselves as Nazis, back in the day. And again, this goes to show the importance of learning history because if you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. And I find it interesting that even today, there are some left wing people, especially radical lefts, who actually coincides and agree with Nazi thinking.
You know, as the saying goes, those who fail to learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat it. And the funny thing is, what amuses me is that that is so true because people never learn the lessons of history. Things repeat themselves over and over and over again. So
Yep.
I laugh when I hear things like, this is unprecedented. This is the worst thing ever. What's going to happen? We've never seen this before. And, I look at these things and I hear people say these things and I say, excuse me, yes, we have seen this before. Numerous times, multiple times. In fact, I can tell you exactly how this is going to play out and how it's going to end. And then when people say, you're a genius, you're a prophet, my response is, no, I'm a student of history. I just looked at what happened before over and over and over again. Why didn't you?
You know, before we continue, I have to admit, I was watching a video that came across my Instagram page probably some months ago, maybe later part of last year. But it was a video of a sheep that got stuck in a ditch. And so the guy comes over and he helps the sheep get out of the ditch. And lo and behold, the sheep is running off, and without fail, it jumps right into another ditch. And when when I look at this video, it dawned on me as this is why people philosophically are compared to sheep. Because sheeps are so predictable in their behavior that you know from the jump if a sheep does a certain behavior, you know it's going to repeat certain actions from that behavior. Likewise, with the human mind, actually, you could kind of think of it in a way of Pavlov's dog.
Exactly.
When you get humans to do certain behaviors, then you can pretty much predict what actions they're going to do just based off of those behaviors.
It amuses me when people talk about the sheep, the sheep, the sheep, the masters, the masters, the masters. The thing is, none of these people wake up in the morning and say, hey, I'm a sheep. Hey, I'm one of the masters. Hey, I follow the herd. I go in the same direction. And then there are the ones that amuse me the most. I'm the top dog. I'm the alpha dog. I'm an alpha. I'm a high. Getting out of there. But I'm the leader. I don't follow the sheep. The sheep follow me. But see, here's the thing. You're still a sheep. You
Mm-hmm.
seek your comfort and your validation amongst other sheep. Yes, you're leading the sheep, but you need to have the sheep around you all moving in the same direction. So you're
Yes,
every bit
sir.
the sheep that they are. You're just the lead sheep, but you're still a sheep because you have to have others around you. It is the true individualist who blazes his own path, who looks where, when everyone is looking in the same direction, he looks to where everyone's not looking. That's the true individual.
Yes, sir. Even the so-called alpha leader has predictable behaviors. Why is that? Because he can't function without the herd. That's what he don't understand.
Exactly. Exactly.
Oh boy, let's definitely continue before we go deeper. But just put it out there that hey, when people talk about sheeps and everything, it's about behavior. Sheep's behavior is predictable. Human behavior is just as predictable. That's what we're trying to get at in this particular segment.
And that's the thing.
All right. Next it says, throughout, actually, excuse me, the rising crescendo of disagreement among these in basic agreement reinforced Hitler's decision to stay out of politics. And on the 29th of July, he sent another appeal for privacy to Der Völkische Courier. Says, I am presently engaged in a work which must not be disturbed. He would from now on refuse all interviews, not confirmed in writing. Wearied as he was of politics and visitors, he did not take time that day to see a German Bohemian Party member, Ines Kugler, who asked a crucial question. Has your position on the Jewish question been somewhat changed? This was one subject near his heart. Yes, he told Kugler. It is quite correct that I have changed my opinion concerning the methods of fighting Jewry. I have come to the realization that I have been far too soft up to now. While working on my book, I have finally come to realize that the harshest methods of fighting must be employed in the future if we are to win. I am convinced that this is not only a matter of life and death for our people, but for all people. The Jew is a world pest. Throughout the summer, Hitler luxuriated in his pleasant quarters, preparing himself for the battle to come. He confined most of his efforts to the book, secure in the expectation of an early parole. It seemed to be assured on September 18th when Warden Leibold dispatched an extremely favorable report to the Bavarian Ministry of Justice. It declared that during his months of imprisonment, Hitler had proved himself to be a man of strict discipline and order, who was at all times cooperative, modest, and courteous to everyone, particularly to the officials of the institution. Leibold concluded with a prediction that Hitler, upon release, would not resort to any violence or illegality. There is no doubt that he has become a more quiet, more mature, and thoughtful individual throughout his imprisonment than he was before, and does not contemplate acting against existing authority. At first, it seemed certain that Leibold's strong recommendation would bring about Hitler's release in early fall. But on the 22nd of September, the Bavarian State Police sent a confidential report to the Ministry of the Interior recommending that Hitler not be released on the 1st of October. And if this came about unexpectedly, he should be deported as a security measure. The moment he was set free, Hitler would generate riots because of his energy. Penal Chamber 1 ignored this recommendation and declared Hitler eligible for parole. But an appeal from the Minister of Justice on the grounds that the prisoner had flagrantly violated visiting privileges was upheld. Parole was denied. Hitler's frustration was complete, but as he had done before, he lifted himself out of his depression and returned to work on his book. All day long, recalled Hemrick, and late into the night, one could hear the typewriter going in his room, and his voice dictating to Hess. Nor did he neglect his duty as Führer. On the first anniversary of the Munich Putsch, he spoke with deep emotion to the political prisoners gathered in the common room. While charging himself with the entire responsibility for the whole affair, he demonstrated how it failed for historical reasons. His hearers were profoundly impressed with the leader's sincerity and deep morality. November passed, and though there was still no indication that parole was at hand, he remained stoic. In the meantime, one of his most prestigious followers, Göring, was in a Venice hotel, attempting to negotiate a badly needed loan from Benito Mussolini. Although still recuperating from his painful wound, which required heavy drug dosage, the former war ace was exerting himself in the Führer's service. He was involved in a frustrating correspondence with Neo Negrelli, an agent of Mussolini, in hopes of getting 2 million lire from the fascists, as well as a promise from Il Duce to see Hitler once he was out of prison. In return, the National Socialists would publicly support Italy's claim to the South Tyrol, an action that would lose numerous supporters, particularly in Bavaria. But apparently, the fascists doubted they would get their money's worth from a party whose attempt to emulate the March on Rome had ended so disastrously, and Göring's pleading became shrill. The fascists were at one time small and laughed at, he argued. One should not believe that National Socialists have no future. In a few years, they would be in power. He enlarged upon the embarrassment the NSDAP would face because of its support of such an unpopular cause as the South Tyrol, and pointed out what a bargain Mussolini was getting for a mere 2 million lire. For this, you would have in our press an important speaking trumpet. Besides, you will get your 2 million back at the latest in 5 years. A few days later, Göring became more insistent. It would really be good if the greatest national movements would have more understanding of each other. Anti-Semitism must in a certain sense be international. The Jews must be fought in all countries. But the month of November slipped by, with Mussolini still refusing to commit himself. Nor is it likely that he ever did loan the 2 million lire, and the Führer is still in prison. A few of his comrades were released by mid-December. Hitler bore these repeated disappointments upon his own return to freedom with equanimity and philosophy, remembered Hemrick. The remainder prepared to celebrate the season at Landsberg as best as they could. They put up holiday decorations and set up a Christmas tree in the common room. But before they could decorate it, the efforts of the state cabinet to prevent Hitler's parole finally ended. On December 19th, the Bavarian Supreme Court, perhaps influenced by a threat from the 3 late judges of the Hitler trial to make a public appeal, ordered his immediate release. Warden Leibold himself brought the news to Hitler, and early the following afternoon, after spending more than a year in prison, Hitler bade farewell to his comrades, gave them all his money, which was 282 marks, then shook hands with Hemrick and thanked him for all he had done. There followed a tearful parting with Leibold. When I left Landsberg, recalled Hitler, everyone wept, the warden and the other members of the prison staff. But not I. We won them all to our cause. So, interesting. Interesting that even spending a year in prison, that pretty much Hitler gained a following in his short little stay, which to me is a precursor to how much he's going to build a bigger following now that he's a free man.
Exactly. And the funny thing is, even though even though the even though the beer hall putsch failed, he actually gained a lot of support from the common man, from the
Hmm.
people, because people agreed with what he was saying, which again brings us back to Germany now during the 1920s and the Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic was not addressing the needs of the people.
Hmm.
They were addressing the needs of artists, engineers, um, musicians, architects, fine, great, all of that, you know, the Bauhaus and everything else, but they were not addressing the average common citizen. They were not addressing the debt, the economy, the unemployment, the infrastructure. Hitler was. These were the things that he was speaking to.
Right. And again, like you said, if the common man doesn't have, his own little chickens and all, he's not going to be happy. And eventually, if the if the middleman is not getting his own chicken, he's not going to be happy. It's almost like a domino effect. And go right ahead.
No. You go.
I was going to say it's almost like a domino effect. And eventually, when more and more people are not getting happy, eventually somebody's going to take those emotions and use it for their own gain.
Yeah.
And for Hitler, that's exactly how it played out.
Yeah. Textbook. Like the old saying goes, if there's a chicken in every pot, there is no revolution. Rather, if there's a chicken in every pot, there will be no revolution.
Hmm. Yep,
As long as the basic needs are being met, everyone's happy.
that's true. Very true. Next, it says, it was a raw gray day. Hitler tersely greeted the two who come to take him home, his printer, Adolf Mueller, and Hoffman, the photographer. Before stepping briskly into the touring car, its canvas top raised as protection against the cold, he turned to Hoffman, who had not been allowed to take photographs in the prison, and told him to get his picture. After one was taken at the ancient city gate, which had a fortress atmosphere, Hoffman wanted to know what Hitler intended to do now. I shall start again, from the beginning, he said. As they sped towards Munich, Hitler reveled in the experience. He reveled in the experience. What a joy it was for me to be in a car again. He asked Mueller to go faster. No, was the reply. It was my firm intention to go on a living for another 25 years. At passing, they were met by a group of Nazi motorcyclists who accompanied them into the city. Party faithfuls were waiting outside his apartment house. At the top of the stairs, Hitler was almost bowled over by his exorbitant dog. He found his room filled with flowers and laurel wreaths. Neighbors had covered the table with food and drink, including a bottle of wine. Prince had not marked him with self-pity. Far from regretting his months in Landsberg, he professed they had been essential for his development. That period gave me the chance of deepening various notions for which I then had only an instinctive feeling. It was during this incarceration, too, that I acquired that fearless faith, that optimism, that confidence in our destiny, which nothing could shake thereafter. Hitler left Landsberg hardened by adversity, more settled in his conviction, unabashed by the party feuds and the apparent blighting of his political ambitions. He had returned to Munich determined to take a new political role. Never again would he make the old mistakes. He had been a Führer in name only, serving a party that had been founded by others. From now on, he would be a true Führer, shaping his own program in his own way towards long-range goals. His first task was to assess the political situation. The National Socialist Bloc had lost more than half its seats in December elections, with the popular vote slipping from 1,918,000 300 to 907,300. Moreover, the NSDAP itself was still illegal, and he would have to operate underground. On the positive side, he was not only free, but deportation proceedings against him had been squashed by the man who had recently fought his parole. Justice Minister Gertner had undoubtedly been influenced by Austrian refusal to take Hitler back. He had come out of prison as a martyred saint to all Völkisch groups, and this racist movement, despite the evidence of the December elections, was burgeoning. This growth, ironically, had been unleashed by the putsch. Many people who had wavered between the moderate and radical wings of the patriotic movement swung to extremism as a result of their emotional involvement in the abortive uprising. In a sense, the NSDAP had a stronger base than ever, and while its two warring groups were wide apart, Hitler was confident he could somehow induce both factions to place loyalty to him above their differences. He was to be the program, and his followers would have to equate Völkisch aims with his personal political success. The image of Adolf Hitler, the national martyr, would become the personalization of flag, freedom, and racial purity. What had been thought out carefully in the peace and solitude of his cell was quite another thing in the unaccustomed freedom of Munich. On that first evening of liberty, he didn't know what to do with himself. I had the impression that any moment a hand would be laid on my shoulder, and I would remain obsessed by the idea that I have to ask leave for anything I wanted to do. Shrewd enough to realize that only time would enable him to regain contact with reality, he decided to remain quiet for several weeks before embarking on the task of reconciling the enemy brothers. On the first steps in his project to regain civilian composure was a visit to the Hafstigels on a snowy Christmas Eve. They had moved from their cramped apartment to a spacious house across the Isar River, a pleasant sector near Herzog Park, boasting such prestigious neighbors as Thomas Mann. As Hitler entered the studio, he looked around nervously and then said, almost pleadingly, "Hafstigel, play me the Lies Bestall." After Hafstigel hammered out this tremendous theme from Tristan and Isolde, with Liz Stein embellishment, Hitler began to relax. Helen brought in her new daughter, Herta. Hitler crowed over the baby and apologized for what had happened to Adolfing. "You are the most feudal acquaintances I have," he finally said, surveying the studio. Suddenly, in mid-sentence, he darted a glance over his shoulder. "I'm sorry," he explained. "That's what jail does to you. There's always some damn jailer standing behind watching you." In Landsberg, he explained, someone was constantly observing him through the observation hole in the door. A horrible feeling. That, I am certain they were seeking for some pretext to have me transferred to an insane asylum. You know, I went on a hunger strike for 2 weeks, and they tried to make that grounds for an insanity charge. Perhaps that was why he ended his fast. After dinner, and the presentation of gifts that lay under the candlelit Christmas tree, Helen, Hitler, and 4-year-old Egon settled around the piano while Hafstigel played piece after piece on the Steinway. A military march seemed to inspire Hitler to stride up and down the room like a soldier, hands clasped behind his back, recalling scenes from the Great War. For the benefit of Egan, he began imitating a battle, reproducing the noise of howitzers, 75s, and machine guns, separately and all at once. This was followed by a lecture on politics, which evolved into a tirade against the Jews. His anti Semitism, thought Hamstigel, seemed to have acquired more specific racial undertones. He had become convinced that Wall Street, and in fact all of America, was controlled by the Jews. Then his thoughts and words abruptly turned to his dearest friend in Landsberg, Ike Menrudi mein Hesser. Hitler exclaimed emotionally. Isn't it appalling to think he's still there? Before he left, Hitler managed to have a few moments of privacy with Helen in the studio. She was seated on a large sofa, and all at once he dropped to his knees and put his head on her lap. If only I had someone to take care of me, he said. Look, this won't do, said Helen, and asked him why he didn't get married. I can never marry because my life is dedicated to my country. She thought he was acting like a little boy, and perhaps he was. 17 years ago, almost to the day, his mother had died. It would have been awful if someone had come in, recalled Helen. Humiliating to him. He was taking a chance. He really was. That was the end of it, and I passed it off as it simply had not happened. All right, so we just finished chapter 7. And after is pretty interesting up to this point. But before I say something, good sir, what's your thoughts?
What stands out to me is, again, Hitler's love for classical music and his love for being his histrionics and grandiosity and war, which is amusing given the fact that his career in the military during the First War was an absolute failure. But again, you see how the themes of his love for classical music and how that broken childhood always played itself out through his entire life. He was, like all of us, he was a product of his environment, nature versus nurture, right? So you see how this woman, Helene, what was her response? Was he's acting like what? A little boy. Because
Mhm.
he always found comfort in that mothering, trying to find a woman who he could parentify.
Right. And that kind of gives me a question that kind of ties in with your question as well. But it definitely goes into the whole mothering aspect. I my honest question is if Hitler had founded some woman before this would being rejected by Vienna, before this when he went off into the Great War and that the loss of the German people and all, and even before this with the putsch, the failed putsch.
Mm-hmm.
Had Hitler have found some woman that reminded him of his mother.
Uh-oh. I think I know where you're going with this.
Right. Will we even be talking about Hitler up until this point?
Bingo. And that, my friend, is an interesting question. I hadn't thought about that before. That is an interesting question. You know what they say? Music to calm the savage beast, right? Or in the case of a broken little boy, or rather a broken man child, a woman to soothe the broken monster.
Right.
Mm, Good
Because
question.
I was looking at that last paragraph where he's having a moment with Helen, and I'm just thinking to myself, she called it out like this is just a little boy crying out for his mother, and I can't give him that because I'm a married woman, I have kids and everything. But it's just like, why haven't this dude found? I mean, she knows that this guy was getting letters and admirations from women and all. And even though he's saying like, well, I'm married to the country, that is my wife, and that is who I'm devoted to. Even she saw right through it. It's like, dude, all it would take was just one woman who have those qualities, and you probably would not even be on this particular rampage.
That is an effective. That is a very good question. I never thought about that before. Had he met the right woman before the pooch or even after, even still, right now, but definitely after the pooch? That is a very good question. Had he had the right woman on his arm, would he even have attempted the beer hall putsch?
Right.
I have to ponder that. I definitely have to ponder that.
Right. And same with me. Same with me. It is just something that, after reading that last part, that I'm just like, you know, maybe Hitler may not have become who he is in history if the right woman that has all those motherly traits was just so happened to be on to his side. And so I mean, you got some hard knocks, especially those that's in like the whole MGTOW of like, man, all women are the same. I can't deal with them at all. And I'm like, yeah, I've heard it all. It's you go be your He-Man and whatnot, but just know this. Just know this. And even I have witnessed this. All it takes is just that right woman to come around and
And all of that goes right out of the window.
right out the window.
The funny thing is, right? So, again, we're going to look at this from a more slightly esoteric point of view, yin and yang, male aspect and female aspect. Men are hardwired to be with straight men are hardwired to be with women, and straight women are hardwired to be with men.
Right.
We don't. So, if you have the right woman in your life, or if you're a woman, you have the right man in your life, you know, it's biscuits and gravy. You're firing on all cylinders. So I don't understand and I don't get the acrimony and the rancor. And it's funny because it seems to me the guys and both the men and the women who talk this gender war nonsense, which is the dumbest thing I've heard in my life. Have you noticed these people are always single? Or
Yes.
they've been divorced 2 and 3 times? Like, I don't get it. Like, you know what? Could it be that you're just miserable because you didn't get it right, because you don't understand who you are? So how can you understand who someone else is when you're failing to understand who you are first? Because
Right.
then once you understand who you are, then your mindset and your perceptions change, and then everything changes. It just it's funny to me how people who are happy, who are in thriving stable relationships and marriages and families with children, they don't complain about all this crap. And you know whether it's whatever the label is, from MGTOW to this one to that one to pink pill to black pill to red pill to fuchsia pill to green pill, to this war and that war and gender this and all this other nonsense. But all of you people are single and you're always
Mm.
dating and you're always ripping and running and you're pumping and you're dumping and you're this, that, and the third, and everything else. But you're never in a stable, happy, thriving relationship. Could that be the real problem?
Right. Well, to me, it's one of those things where I'm just like, hey, you know, you got the big towels. They're saying that all uh, women are the same. Nothing about them is likable, and they all do this, and they're gonna get you and make your life miserable. And the same rhetoric talk from the feminist side, yada yada. And I always ask this question. Okay, so you're telling me that even if you was to relocate, even if you was to change locations, that no matter what you do, what you say, or where you go, you always end up with these types of people. And they be like, yeah, yeah, that's correct. And I turn around and say, well, sir, madam, what that tells me is you have a tendency to attract these type of people.
Bingo. Because what's the constant in all of these equations? You.
You
The problem isn't external, it's internal. It's you.
right. So to me, it's like you need to figure out what is it about you that attracts these certain types of people. It
Yeah.
There's a person, that's deceased and all, another YouTuber. I don't agree with a lot of what he said, but there's one thing he said that I have to say, you know what? There's definitely truth to it, and that moniker was, "You are what you attract." And what you don't attract, you are not.
Yeah, and the thing is, he was not clearly a student of anything esoteric, yet he unbeknowingly stumbles across something that is very esoteric,
Right.
because your energy who you are, is what attracts people to you, whether it's professional, personal, or romantic, or otherwise. At the end of the day, it's you. It ends and starts with you. Your energy defines who comes into your circle, because it's your energy that attracts them. So when you find that you keep having issues with a certain type of person, regardless of whatever the nature of the relationship is, personal, professional, romantic, or otherwise. It's not them, it's you. And
Right.
until you change, you're going to keep attracting the same types of people.
Exactly, good sir. Exactly. Well, before we conclude this stream and on this particular episode, so at this point, up until now, because we're still in the 1920s and we still got some things to cover before we get up into the 1930s for the cutoff. But at this point in time, what's your assessment of Hitler?
As I said, it didn't dawn on me until our last stream, but the more I ponder it, the more I read it, the more I look at it, I'm of the working theory. I'm of the working theory that had the Bureau Putsch succeeded, he would not have become the radical that he did. That
Right.
failure radicalized him. So on the one hand, his enemies won, but they lost. They lost in the long term.
Mm. Right. And to me, I'm starting to come to that same conclusion that to be the people who I I sorry about that. I agree that for the most part, the the thing with the pooch and all, I just kind of feel like had that one thing went right. No, I'm not talking as far as the bloodshed with the pooch and everything, but had it gone right in his life, one important event in his life that gone right, I really believe, just like you, that there was no way he would have become this radicalized Hitler that we're about to venture into in this biography.
Hmm.
To me, there was just so much that certain people that had come in contact with him up until this point, that if just one person kind of showed compassion for him or showed much more empathy for him and actually kind of helped to guide him in a more productive lifestyle, I think that would have been a difference maker and definitely would not have made him as radical as we're starting to see.
When I was in junior high school, um, my eighth grade homeroom teacher was also my social studies teacher,
Mm,
and he was just mean and miserable. So eighth grade, you're what, 13, 12, 13, 13. So the man would always talk about my Hitler and Mein Kampf in the book Mein Kampf.
mm,
And number one, was too young to grasp what he was saying. But then number two, again, I'm 13 and he's just mean and miserable. But it always stuck to this day in the back of my mind. He said something that perplexed me for years. And he would always say that after the failed coup, when Hitler went to jail and he wrote Mein Kampf, he became a different person. And when he emerged, he was a different man. And he set out to change the world. He completely changed him. And I could never grasp what it was that he was saying. Because one, like I said, I was 13, and number two, he was just mean and miserable. So anything that he said, I at that age, I just automatically dismissed. But it always stuck with me. It always stuck in my head, and I think I finally realized what he was really saying. He wasn't saying that the Berlin Putsch failed, Hitler went to jail, and he wrote Mein Kampf. What he was really saying is Hitler became radicalized because of the
mm.
failure of the Berlin Putsch, that he had no thoughts or desires for world domination and conquering other nations. But after the Berlin Putsch failed, that's when he became the monster. That's when he was galvanized. That's what radicalized him. That's when everything changed.
Indeed. And you know, it kind of brought me back to that clip that we played earlier, where the prosecutor was asking Hitler in regards of why would you do such a thing? Why would you lead a putsch like that? And then Hitler, in return, asked him a question. If someone robbed you and you went to that robber and got back what he stole from you, would you still consider yourself a thief? And to me, like you said, it was at that time in that trial where you started to see him become more thoughtful in his process. Beforehand, it was just like reading up into the pooch. You was just seeing a man who was just going where the wind goes, where the wind blows, excuse me. And he had no sense of direction. He felt like he had a cause, but there was definitely no thought process behind it. He literally was just meat to bones.
Mm.
But now that the pooch has failed and he start to recollect and reflect on the mistakes and all, even during the trial, excuse me, you started to see a person who was becoming more calculated. A person who now was starting to come forth from his cocoon. And to me, like you said, had the pooch went successful, I don't think he would have ever came out of that cocoon.
Yep. Yeah. I agree. I really think that he really became a different person. He completely changed, but not necessarily for the better. And again, I'm not a person who ever vilified Adolf, because to me, I've never seen him as this monster boogeyman that he's been portrayed since during the war, but it really radicalized him. It changed him.
Right. And I'm with you too. I personally believe that all of the history that's written about his, especially as far as your history books here in America and all. Of course, history is written by the victors.
Right.
So of course they're going to write him as this monster of a person who was just out for blood, who simply did not have any sort of emotions to him and everything. But I realized then and there in my history books, like, well, let's hear his side of the story. Let's see in regards of what led him to go about, so to speak, this monstrous way. And more, like now, reading his biography and all, you starting to see an individual that had just one positive influence came into his life. If one successful endeavor just happened in his life, there was no way he would have turned out to be this extremist that history would portray him to be. Just my opinion.
Yeah, I really have to agree, man. I mean, the more I think about it, I think had that failure not happened, how different would the world be? Because then, you also have you also have to ask the question, because I thought about, you know, had he given Admiral Rader the 5 years that he needed to execute and build Plan H. But if if the beer hall putsch succeeds, I don't think Hitler would have been, again, I could be way off base. I don't think Hitler would have been the man who goes to Admiral Rader in 39 and asks, how much time do you need to build this Plan H fleet?
Right. Right indeed. All right. Well, that concludes tonight's or this morning's episode. Just want to thank everybody that were listening in and those who will be listening on the replay. And so we are almost done with Hitler's 1920s adventures and the Weimar Republic. We pretty much are going to lead into the next chapter that will lead into the 30s, and we'll be able to conclude the 20s in that regard. So definitely stay tuned for that, because we will then start to get into our other candidates that we're going to go into with the countries in the 1920s and all, in regards of England, in regards of Russia, the United States, and Japan. We're going to get into these countries and look to see what was going on in their respective quarters that made these figureheads into the people that they are in regards to history. But with that said, I am your host, Admiral Sigma Jones. This is my co-host, Logic's Finest, for the War Room. Until next time.
Auf Wiedersehen.